It happened at a family dinner. My son-in-law, Kevin, looked at me with a condescending smirk and then gestured toward a security guard. He said to remove me, this beggar, from the table. He had no idea that I owned the very company where he held his cushy management job. He couldn't have possibly known that by tomorrow, his fancy office would be replaced with a toilet brush. As Kevin cut into his prime rib with a theatrical flourish, he said that poor people just don't understand quality. They see the price tag and panic, he said, instead of recognizing the real value. My knuckles went white as I gripped my water glass. I thought about how some of us have to work for our money instead of just having it handed to us. The dining room at the Spokane Club hummed with Sunday afternoon chatter, the gentle clink of crystal against fine china a constant backdrop. At our table, a heavy silence hung in the air, a taut wire just waiting to snap. Kevin's laughter broke the tension, carrying that same old condescending tone. He told me that working hard and working smart were two completely different things. He said that successful people make wise investments, build strong networks, and create their own opportunities. I wanted to tell him I had been working since before he was born. He just motioned around the upscale restaurant with his knife. He was making a point about how his parents, Mike and Carol Peterson, were the ones treating everyone to dinner because they had built something substantial. His parents sat up straighter, clearly pleased with his defense of their lifestyle. My daughter, Melissa, kept her eyes fixed on her salmon, refusing to meet my gaze. She used to climb on my shoulders to reach cookie jars, but now she looked completely embarrassed to be there with me. I carefully said that building something means different things to different people. He leaned back in his chair, his expensive suit jacket hanging perfectly on his athletic frame, and asked if it really did. He said that some people build empires while others just survive. A wave of heat rose in my chest. I wanted to tell him that survival requires a kind of strength he would never understand. His voice grew louder, causing other diners to glance our way. He asked if I considered living paycheck to paycheck strength. In his opinion, it was just a mix of poor planning and bad decisions. My fork clattered against my plate. I asked him what he'd said. He replied that I had heard him perfectly, and his eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. He said that I envied successful people because I had never learned how to become one myself. The words hit me like a physical blow. Melissa finally looked up, her face red with mortification, but she remained silent. Her silence cut deeper than Kevin's insults. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly on the polished hardwood. I wanted to say that I was working on construction sites while he was playing video games. And look where that got you, he said, without even flinching. Wearing bargain store clothes to dinner at the Spokane Club. Getting defensive about basic economic realities. Other diners turned their heads to stare at us. A waiter approached our table tentatively, but quickly retreated when Kevin waved him off. Mike and Carol exchanged worried glances, but neither said a word. "Hey, security!" Kevin called out sharply, his voice carrying across the restaurant. He asked the security guard to escort me away from the table, saying that I was making his family uncomfortable. His words landed like a sledgehammer to my pride. Melissa covered her face with her hands. The security guard walked toward me, wearing the same apologetic look I had seen on countless job sites when I had to deliver bad news. I looked down at my daughter one last time. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I told him quietly that he would regret those words. My voice carried a menacing edge that made his confident smile falter, just for a moment. I walked toward the exit, my worn boots clicking on the marble floor. I passed by tables filled with people who belonged in a place like this, people who weren't mistaken for beggars by their own family. Outside, a March wind cut right through my old sweater. I got into my dented Toyota Camry, which was surrounded by luxury cars that felt like silent judges. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. It had been 4 years since my wife, Margaret, had passed away. 4 years of watching my daughter drift away, choosing status and a new family over me. Tonight simply confirmed what I had suspected all along but refused to accept, I had become an embarrassment to the only family I had left. But Kevin and his family had made a critical error. He assumed I was powerless. He had no idea just how wrong he was. Sleep had been impossible for me. I had driven home through the empty Sunday streets, replaying every word, every sneer, and every painful moment of my daughter's silence. It was Monday morning. Light filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting harsh shadows across yesterday's newspaper. My hands still shook with residual rage as the ceramic mug trembled against my lips, the coffee burning my tongue. The restaurant scene replayed in my mind, Kevin's arrogant smile, the security guard's approach, me walking past all those judging eyes like a common troublemaker. The shrill ring of the phone cut through my thoughts. It was Melissa. "Dad," she said. Melissa's voice carried that familiar tone of barely contained irritation. "Morning, sweetheart," I said. "We need to talk about yesterday," she said, without any warmth or concern for my feelings. "It was just business." She told me I had completely embarrassed their family. I put the mug down harder than I intended. I couldn't believe it. I thought about how her husband had called me a beggar right in front of her. She told me I had simply overreacted to everything Kevin had said. She said he was just making conversation about economics. The word conversation came out strangled from my throat. I thought about how he had insulted working people and called security on me as if I were some kind of threat. She said I was making a scene, shouting, and standing up like I wanted to fight. Her exasperation crackled through the phone. She said that Mike and Carol were mortified. I asked her what about her father being mortified. A long silence stretched between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was icy. She said I needed to apologize to Kevin, his parents, and everyone who had witnessed my outburst. I wondered, apologize for what? For standing up for myself? She paused, carefully choosing her words, saying I needed to apologize for acting like someone who doesn't understand how civilized people behave. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter was talking to me as if I were a problem she had to manage. "I'm your father, Melissa, not your enemy," I said. "Then start acting like it," she replied. "Call Kevin today. Make this right." Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone's blank screen, my anger slowly turning into something colder. After a few minutes, I opened Facebook, a site I rarely bothered with anymore. A post from Kevin sat at the top of my feed, having been posted 3 hours earlier. He wrote that sometimes family dinners remind you that success isn't just about money. It's about class, education, and knowing how to handle yourself in public. He added that poor relatives who resent other people's achievements can really test your patience. He was grateful for Melissa's understanding when her father had his little tantrum at dinner. He ended the post by saying, "Some people just can't handle being around success. Family drama. Stay classy." The post had 43 likes and dozens of supportive comments from his friends, all of them laughing about my tantrum. His friends praised his patience with difficult family members. My fingers trembled as I tried to type a comment, but an error message appeared: "You cannot reply to this post." He had blocked me. My own son-in-law had publicly humiliated me, mocked my supposed tantrum to hundreds of people, and then blocked me from defending myself. The coward had made sure I couldn't respond, all while painting himself as the patient victim of a crazy old man. My phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the kitchen table. 3 years. I had been helping them behind the scenes for 3 years, making sure their lives were comfortable while they looked down on me like some charity case. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. But as I sat there staring at that poisonous post, something fundamental shifted inside my chest. The hurt began to crystallize into something far more dangerous. They had wanted to see what a poor, powerless old man could do. Now was the time to show them exactly who they had been dealing with all along. That blocked message stared back at me like a physical slap across the face. As my rage settled into something colder, memories began to surface. They were painful and ironic, detailing how this all began. 3 years ago, Kevin had been desperate. He was fresh out of college with a marketing degree and zero prospects. He had sat across from me at that same kitchen table, his hands trembling as he explained his situation. He had whispered that he knew he wasn't what most companies looked for, but he would work harder than anyone if someone would just give him a chance. Melissa had squeezed my arm, suggesting that maybe someone in construction could use some marketing help. That very afternoon, I made some calls. I didn't make them to find Kevin a job, I made them to create one for him. I called Jim Rogers at Patterson and Associates, asking him to pose as a reference for work Kevin had never done. I then contacted Sarah Miller at Northwest Marketing and convinced her to fabricate a glowing recommendation for projects that existed only on paper. Within a week, my company's HR department received Kevin's application with stellar references and a portfolio of completely fictional work. I personally made sure it landed on the right desk with a note about a promising young talent worth considering. Melissa had cried with relief when Kevin got the position. She told me she didn't know how to thank me for my advice, saying that I always knew exactly what to say. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much, but that was only the beginning. Over the next 3 years, I had orchestrated an entire career for my ungrateful son-in-law. I secretly authorized his monthly performance bonuses and instructed his managers to inflate his metrics. I arranged for him to receive an upgraded company car, making it seem like a random selection. I even disguised paid vacation packages as team-building incentives. Meanwhile, Melissa's own rapid advancement through my company's HR department had been just as manufactured. Promotions coincidentally opened up whenever she was ready for the next step. Training opportunities happened to align perfectly with her schedule. Her salary increase was simply a market adjustment. I had also spent countless hours covering for Kevin's actual performance. I had personally smoothed over client complaints about his tone-deaf marketing campaigns. I had reframed his presentation disasters as learning experiences. Reports documenting his incompetence somehow got buried in administrative shuffles that I had quietly arranged. The young couple had grown more confident with each success, becoming completely convinced of their own exceptional abilities. They started talking about their natural talent for business and their instinct for career advancement. All the while, I was signing authorization after authorization and making phone call after phone call, ensuring their manufactured success continued seamlessly. Now, staring at Kevin's social media mockery, the full scope of my foolishness crashed over me. I had created the monster that just devoured me. Every arrogant word he had spoken at dinner, every dismissive gesture, every moment of condescension, I had enabled it all. They truly believed they had earned their comfortable lives through merit and hard work. In reality, they were corporate welfare recipients who had spent 3 years feeding from my hand while learning to bite it. The most pathetic part was that they had never even suspected it. Not once had either of them questioned their remarkable string of good fortune. They simply accepted their success as inevitable, natural, and deserved. I set my phone down carefully, my fingers no longer shaking with rage, but steady with something far more dangerous. For 3 years, I had been their invisible benefactor, their secret guardian angel. I had given them everything they had, everything they were proud of, everything that made them feel superior to poor, powerless old me. And that meant I could take it all away just as easily. It was time to teach them the difference between earned success and charity. 20 minutes later, I stood in the elevator of the Cox Construction building, watching the floor numbers climb toward my private office. The drive had given me time to shift gears completely, from wounded father to calculating CEO. By the time the doors opened on the executive floor, my personal pain had crystallized into professional focus. As I passed my assistant, she nodded respectfully. She said my 10:30 was ready whenever I was. "Cancel it," I said without breaking stride. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 hours." Inside my office, I settled behind the mahogany desk that had served as my command center for 15 years. The leather chair creaked familiarly as I powered up my computer and accessed files that most employees never knew existed. Kevin Peterson's personnel record filled my screen. There were 3 years of carefully documented performance reviews, inflated metrics, and buried complaints. But underneath that sanitized version was the real data, raw client feedback, actual project outcomes, and measurable failures that I had systematically covered up. The Rogers account came to mind. Kevin's tone-deaf campaign had nearly cost us $1 million contract. For the Riverside project, his marketing materials had been so poorly conceived that we had to redo everything at the company's expense. For the Northwest expansion, his research was so sloppy that we wasted 6 months pursuing dead-end leads. Each failure had been my chance to step in, smooth things over, and redirect the blame elsewhere. I had been so focused on protecting my daughter's happiness that I had completely forgotten to protect my company's interests. The intercom buzzed. "Brian," I said, "could you come in for a minute? I need your take on something." Brian Anderson entered with his usual efficiency, tablet in hand and ready for business. He had been my right hand for 8 years, completely trustworthy and refreshingly direct. He asked what he could help me with. I told him I was reviewing the marketing department's performance and wanted his honest assessment of Kevin Peterson's work. Brian's expression became carefully neutral, the look of a professional trying to be diplomatic about a difficult topic. "His enthusiasm is certainly high," he began cautiously. I leaned back in my chair. "Brian, this is between us," I said. "I need your unfiltered opinion." There was a moment of hesitation, then honesty won out. He told me Kevin's work was consistently subpar. He listed client complaints, missed deadlines, and campaigns that missed the mark entirely. The team was frustrated, he said. "How frustrated?" I asked. Brian told me that Sarah Miller in graphics had been fixing his presentations for months without being asked. Marketing associates had started double-checking his research because they didn't trust it. He said we had lost 2 potential contracts directly because of Kevin's mishandling. I nodded, making notes. I added that team morale must be suffering. He shrugged and said that when people work hard and someone consistently underperforms with no consequences, it affects everyone's motivation. I closed the file and looked directly at Brian. I told him we might need to make some adjustments. After Brian left, I sat quietly for several minutes, processing what I had learned. My son-in-law wasn't just incompetent, he was actively damaging company morale and costing us money. The team knew it. Management knew it. Everyone knew it except for the 2 people who mattered most, Kevin and Melissa. They thought his success was earned, deserved, and inevitable. They had no idea that his entire career was an elaborate fiction maintained solely by my misguided generosity. It was time to start editing that fiction. I opened a new document and began typing, Personnel Action Request, Kevin Peterson. Position adjustment. Not a termination. Not yet. First, I wanted him to understand what it felt like to fall from grace, to watch everything he thought he had earned slip away piece by piece, the same way he had made me feel at the restaurant table. Within the hour, I had Jessica Martin sitting across from my desk, tablet ready and professional demeanor intact. She had been our HR director for 5 years, and she was efficient, discreet, and unquestioningly loyal to the company's interests. I told her I needed her to process a personnel change for Kevin Peterson, keeping my voice neutral and businesslike. "What kind of change, Mr. Cox?" she asked. "A demotion from marketing manager to facilities maintenance," I replied. "Effective immediately." Jessica's fingers paused over her tablet for just a moment. It was the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. She asked if she could have the reasoning for the record. "Performance issues, multiple client complaints, missed deadlines, and substandard work quality," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Brian documented everything last quarter. The demotion is justified and necessary." She asked what to do about his current projects. "Transfer everything to Sarah Miller," I said. "She's been covering for him anyway." I leaned back in my chair. "Process the paperwork today. Send the notification email by 2 o'clock. Jessica left to prepare the documentation while I pulled up the security camera feed on my computer. Kevin sat at his desk in the marketing department, completely absorbed in whatever meaningless task occupied his attention. His expensive suit looked perfectly pressed, and his confidence seemed unshakable. Not for much longer. At exactly 2:15 p.m. I watched him open his email. The subject line read, Personnel Action Notice, Immediate Position Change, which was corporate language at its most clinical and devastating. The change in his posture was immediate and dramatic. He straightened suddenly, leaning closer to his screen as if the distance had made him misread something. His lips moved silently as he probably read the notice multiple times. The notice stated, effective immediately, you are reassigned from marketing manager to facilities maintenance associate. Your new supervisor will be James Rodriguez. Report to room B12 tomorrow at 7 a.m. for orientation and uniform assignment. I zoomed in on his face through the camera. Confusion was written all over his features, the bewildered look of someone whose world had just tilted sideways without warning or explanation. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the email again, searching for some mistake or clarification that simply wasn't there. Then came the anger. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, and he grabbed his phone with the sharp movement of someone ready to fight. I watched him dial what was probably the HR department, his free hand gesturing angrily at his computer screen, even though no one could see him. Jessica Martin's line would be busy, of course. I had made sure she was in meetings for the rest of the afternoon. Kevin tried calling again and again. Each failed attempt increased his agitation, his movements becoming more erratic and desperate. Other employees started glancing his way, drawn by his obvious distress. He switched to email, typing furiously. I could see his anger in every keystroke, every sharp tap against the keyboard. He was demanding explanations, threatening to escalate to upper management, and insisting there had been some terrible mistake. There had been no mistake. For 3 years, I had shielded him from the consequences of his incompetence. I had buried reports, smoothed over disasters, and manufactured successes that existed nowhere but on paper. I had created a bubble of artificial achievement that made him feel important, valuable, and untouchable. Today, I had popped that bubble. Watching him spiral into confused rage while sitting safely in my office felt like the first satisfying breath I had taken since Sunday night. This was just the beginning. It was a small taste of the powerlessness he had made me feel at that restaurant table. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. He had heard about Kevin's reassignment and said, "Facilities is going to be interesting." I smiled and set the phone aside. Kevin was probably already planning to storm into management offices, demanding to speak with whoever had made this ridiculous decision. Perfect. I thought. Let him come looking for answers. I had so many things I wanted to tell him. About 40 minutes later, my assistant's voice came through the intercom with a tone I recognized as barely concealed amusement. She told me an extremely agitated employee was here and demanding to speak with the general manager about an urgent personnel matter. I told her to send him in and settled back into my leather chair. The door was thrown open with enough force to rattle the frame. Kevin stormed into the room, his face flushed with righteous anger, his expensive suit wrinkled from his agitated pacing. He opened his mouth to deliver what was clearly a prepared speech, but then he stopped dead. His expression shifted from anger to confusion and then to something that was approaching pure panic. "Alan," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He asked me what I was doing there and where the general manager was. I simply gestured to the chair across from my desk with the same calm authority I had used in countless business meetings, and I invited him to sit down. He remained standing, looking around the room as if he were searching for hidden cameras or some kind of elaborate prank setup. He said he didn't understand why I was in the executive office. I told him it was because this was my office, and then I opened the top desk drawer. From it, I took out a folder of documents. I said, "I own Cox Construction, Kevin. I've always owned it." The color drained completely from his face. That's impossible, he whispered. You're lying. I slid the incorporation papers across the mahogany surface. The papers had an official letterhead, legal seals, and my signature on every page dating back 15 years. I told him he could check the state business registry if he wanted to. I said that Alan Cox was the sole proprietor and CEO. He grabbed the documents with trembling hands, frantically scanning the legal language. His lips moved silently as he read and reread sections, as if repeating the words might change them. This can't be real, he whispered, then looked up with desperate hope. He said I must have bought the company recently, after he got hired. I leaned forward slightly. I told him that I had founded this company in 2010. I said he had applied for a job that I had personally created for him in 2022. Do you remember Sunday dinner? I asked. When you called security on that poor old man who couldn't handle being around success. The documents slipped from his fingers, scattering across my desk. No, he said. No. This is some kind of revenge fantasy because I embarrassed you at. I finished his thought for him. I told him he didn't just embarrass me. I said he humiliated me in front of my daughter, called me a beggar, and had me escorted out as if I were some kind of threat. My voice remained perfectly level. I told him that I had decided to show him what real powerlessness felt like. You can't do this, he said, his voice pitching higher as desperation crept in. I've worked here for 3 years. I've earned my position. Have you? I asked. I opened another file and said, let's review your actual performance. I went over the Rogers account, and I told him his marketing campaign had nearly cost us $1 million contract. I said that for the Riverside project, we had to completely redo his materials at the company's expense. For the Northwest expansion, I told him we had wasted 6 months because his research had been worthless. Each example hit him like a physical blow. His confidence crumbled visibly, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his real record settled in. I told him that every failure, every complaint, and every disaster, I had covered for him. I told him I had buried the reports, smoothed over client relations, and made excuses to preserve team morale. For 3 years, I've been your invisible safety net, I said, while you strutted around thinking you'd earn success through talent. He said, but Melissa, she's your daughter. You can't destroy your own family. I told him my family had destroyed itself the moment he had decided I was beneath him. I stood up slowly, using my full height to tower over his defeated posture. I told him he had wanted to know the difference between poor people and successful people. Poor people work for what they have, I said. You've been living on charity. Kevin's face cycled through anger, disbelief, and finally, desperate calculation. He said this wouldn't work, and he would tell Melissa everything. He said she would never forgive me for this. Feel free to call her, I said. Explain how her husband got demoted to janitor by her beggar father. He backed toward the door, pointing an accusing finger. This isn't over, he said. I'll fight this. I'll sue. You'll report to facilities maintenance at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, I said, sitting back down and returning my attention to paperwork as if he had already disappeared. James Rodriguez will explain your new duties. The door slammed behind him with enough force to shake my coffee cup. I smiled and reached for my phone. It was time to see how Melissa reacted to this news. 2 hours later, I placed a call to David Chen, our CFO. The confrontation with Kevin had been satisfying, but the revelation alone wasn't enough. It was time to apply systematic pressure where it would hurt them most, their wallets. David, I need some immediate cost-cutting measures implemented tonight, I said. Of course, Mr. Cox, he replied. Which areas should I focus on? Corporate benefits review, I said. Cancel all discretionary allowances for the Peterson accounts, both Kevin and Melissa. Credit cards, vehicle access, and housing supplements, effective immediately. I heard his rapid typing through the phone. David's efficiency was one of his greatest assets. He asked if he should prepare termination paperwork for these employees. Not yet, I said. Just remove the perks they haven't earned. I leaned back in my chair. Process everything through normal cost reduction protocols. Standard documentation appeared within 30 minutes. David confirmed completion. Their corporate credit cards had been deactivated. The company car recall was scheduled. Their housing allowance payments had been suspended. 3 years of artificial lifestyle support vanished with a few keystrokes. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in days. The young couple was about to discover the difference between earned success and corporate charity. My phone rang just as I pulled into my driveway. "Dad," Melissa's voice said, cracked with panic. "Something's wrong with our credit cards. They're all declined. The car service called about returning the vehicle." "What's happening?" I unlocked my front door slowly, letting her hysteria build. "Could you be more specific about your concerns?" I asked. "Don't play games," she said. "Kevin told me everything. You own his company. You've been controlling our lives." "I've been supporting your lives," I replied. "There's a difference." She said the mortgage payment for their house hadn't gone through and the bank had called. She said they couldn't afford their rent without the housing allowance, and her voice climbed toward genuine panic. "You can't cut us off like this," she said. I settled into my kitchen chair, the same spot where I had made those first calls 3 years ago to help Kevin find work. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Melissa, you're both employed adults," I said. "You'll receive exactly what you earn, nothing more." "But we can't survive on just our salaries," she said, "the house, the car payments. Everything depends on charity," I finished for her. "Yes," she said. She was crying now, ugly sobs that transmitted clearly through the phone. "You're destroying your own daughter's life, your own family." "Your husband destroyed our family," I said, when he had security escort me out of a restaurant like I was some vagrant. My voice remained perfectly level. I told her that he had wanted to show everyone the difference between successful people and poor people. "I'm simply providing him with that education," I said. "Dad, please," she said. "We'll apologize. We'll make this right. Kevin was wrong. I know that now." I said that apologies don't undo humiliation. I said that actions have consequences. She asked me what I wanted from them. I told her I wanted her to understand what it felt like to be powerless, to have someone else control whether you can afford basic dignity. I stood up, walking to the kitchen window that overlooked the modest neighborhood where I actually lived, where I'd always lived, even while secretly funding their upscale lifestyle. "Your husband called me a beggar," I said. "Tomorrow he starts learning what that word really means." She said, "You can't make us homeless. We have nowhere to go." "You have the same options every working person has," I said. "Budget carefully, live within your means, maybe find a cheaper apartment." The line went quiet except for her ragged breathing. "This isn't over," she whispered finally. "No," I agreed. "It's not." After she hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the silence of my small house. For the first time since Sunday night, I felt truly peaceful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for the young couple. I wondered how long their marriage would survive under real financial pressure. The next morning, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. Melissa's name appeared on the screen, but something felt different about the timing. It was too calculated, too early for spontaneous panic. "Dad," she said. Her voice carried an unfamiliar tone, softer and more concerned than yesterday's hysteria. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," she said, "and I'm really worried about you." I set my coffee down carefully. "Worried?" I asked. "How?" "You're not acting like yourself," she said. "Everyone's saying you're having some kind of breakdown, making these irrational decisions about Kevin's job and our finances." The words came too smoothly, too prepared. This isn't the father I know. Everyone, I said. I leaned back in my chair. Who exactly is everyone? People who care about you, she said. People who are concerned that you're not thinking clearly. There was a pause. She then said, Mom wouldn't want you tearing the family apart like this over some misunderstanding at dinner. The mention of Margaret hit exactly where it was intended to, but it also confirmed what I had suspected. This wasn't Melissa speaking. These were coached words, carefully chosen for maximum emotional impact. I asked her what she thought had happened at that dinner. She said Kevin had explained everything, and he said I had felt embarrassed about some business discussion. She said I was now taking it out on their whole family. Her voice wavered slightly. Dad, she said, you need to stop these games and fix what you've done. Kevin doesn't deserve to lose his career over your hurt feelings. Hurt feelings? I repeated the phrase slowly. Is that what he called it? She then said that maybe I should talk to a professional about this anger, and that there were people who could help me work through whatever was causing this breakdown. The suggestion that I needed mental health intervention was the final confirmation. Kevin had spent the night crafting this approach, positioning me as unstable and positioning himself as the rational victim of an old man's irrational revenge. Melissa, I said. These aren't your words. This isn't how you talk, how you think. These are his arguments coming through your mouth. I'm trying to help you see reason, Dad, she said. You're destroying your own daughter's life, your own grandchildren's future. Her voice cracked with genuine emotion now as the script was momentarily abandoned. We could lose our house, she said. We can't afford groceries without the credit cards. I asked her whose fault that was. Yours, she started to say, but she caught herself, probably seeing Kevin's warning gesture. You're the one who's not thinking clearly right now. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the modest neighborhood where I actually lived, where I'd always lived, even while secretly funding their upscale lifestyle. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I said quietly. I said I was clear enough to recognize manipulation when I heard it, and clear enough to understand that my own daughter was willing to question my sanity rather than acknowledge her husband's failures. That's not. I'm not. She said. She was crying now, the careful coaching falling apart under emotional pressure. You've made your choice, Melissa, I said. You chose his version of events over mine. You chose his financial security over my dignity. You chose to call me unstable rather than hold him accountable. Dad, please, she said. I'm just trying to. You're trying to get me to restore benefits that were never earned in the first place, I interrupted. You're trying to use family guilt and amateur psychology to manipulate me into pretending Sunday night never happened. The line went quiet, except for her ragged breathing. I see everything perfectly clearly now, I continued, including the fact that you're not an innocent victim in this situation. You're an active participant. I hung up before she could respond. For several minutes, I stood at the window, processing the depth of the betrayal. My daughter hadn't just chosen her husband's side. She had willingly participated in gaslighting her own father, questioning my mental state to protect their lifestyle. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail, and then it rang again and again. I turned off the ringer and returned to my desk. There were other calls to make, other adjustments to implement. If Melissa wanted to play psychological warfare, she could learn the same lessons about earned versus given success, starting with her own position at the company. That evening, my doorbell rang with the careful, measured tone of people who had rehearsed this moment. Mike and Carol Peterson stood on my front porch, dressed in their best business attire, holding themselves with the diplomatic posture of parents trying to save their child's future. Alan, Mike said, extending his hand with professional warmth. Thank you for agreeing to see us on such short notice. I welcomed them into my living room, noting how their eyes subtly catalogued the space. The quality furniture, the original artwork, the understated markers of genuine wealth rather than flashy displays. They settled into my leather chairs with the careful politeness of people who had prepared talking points. "We're hoping we can find a way to resolve this situation," Mike began, his voice carrying the measured tone of a successful business negotiation. "Obviously, there's been some kind of misunderstanding between you and Kevin. And we'd like to help mediate a solution." Carol leaned forward with maternal concern. "Family relationships are so precious, Alan. We hate to see this conflict affecting everyone, especially the grandchildren's future." "What kind of solution did you have in mind?" I asked, genuinely curious about their approach. "Well," Mike cleared his throat, "we understand there might have been some business disagreements, maybe some hurt feelings about the restaurant incident. We'd be happy to compensate you for any inconvenience or losses you might have suffered." The offer hung in the air like an olive branch extended across an unbridgeable chasm. "This isn't about money, Mike," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "It's about respect and family values, about teaching consequences for actions." "Surely there's some middle ground we can find here," Carol interjected hopefully, "some way to restore harmony without destroying relationships." I studied their faces. I saw their genuine concern, their parental love, and the desperate hope of people who believed every problem had a price tag that could solve it. They had no idea what they were dealing with. "Let me explain what actually happened," I said quietly. "Your son called me a beggar in front of my own daughter. He had security escort me out of a restaurant like I was some kind of vagrant who couldn't afford to be there. He spent 3 years accepting help he never knew he was receiving, then publicly humiliated the person who made his lifestyle possible." The color gradually drained from their faces as the full scope of the situation settled in. "We had no idea things had gotten so personal," Carol whispered. She said Kevin told them it was just a business disagreement, some kind of workplace politics. "Your son has been living entirely on charity for 3 years," I said. "Fake references, manufactured bonuses, covered failures, protected positions. Everything he thought he'd earned through merit was actually a gift from the person he called a beggar." Mike's business instincts were working now, calculating the implications. "The company," he said. "How large is Cox Construction, exactly?" I told him it was large enough that their compensation offer, while generous, wouldn't cover 1 month of the benefits I had been quietly providing their son. They exchanged glances, finally grasping the true power dynamic. Their modest family business success, their comfortable lifestyle, their ability to write checks to solve problems, it all felt small now. All of it was dwarfed by the resources of the man their son had humiliated. "Some things can't be bought or negotiated away," I continued. "Respect, dignity, family loyalty. These aren't commodities with market prices." Michael nodded slowly, his diplomatic facade cracking to reveal a defeated understanding. "We appreciate you taking the time to explain the situation, Alan. We understand this is beyond our ability to fix." After they left, I poured myself a drink and sat in the quiet satisfaction of my living room. The young couple had now exhausted every avenue. Direct confrontation, emotional manipulation, parental intervention. They were completely alone with the consequences of their choices. By Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the restaurant incident, Kevin had arranged 3 interviews. I learned this through Brian, who mentioned hearing about it from someone in accounting. The professional network in Spokane's business community was smaller than most people realized. "He seems confident about his prospects," Brian reported during our morning coffee, telling people he's looking for opportunities more suited to his skill level. I almost smiled at that particular delusion. Kevin's first interview was at Riverside Marketing, a mid-sized firm that handled regional campaigns for local businesses. I happened to know their creative director, Sarah Martinez, from industry events. Her standards were rigorous, her technical questions specific and unforgiving. The interview lasted 20 minutes, 15 minutes longer than it should have, probably out of professional courtesy. "Can you walk us through your most successful campaign and the metrics you achieved?" Sarah would have asked, as she did with every candidate. Kevin's response would have been vague, defensive. "I managed multiple high-impact projects that significantly improved brand visibility and client engagement. What specific conversion rates did you achieve? What was the ROI on your budget allocation? The silence that followed would have been telling. By Tuesday, he'd been rejected by Riverside, Northwest Creative, and Pinnacle Communications. The feedback was consistently similar. Impressive resume, but an inability to demonstrate concrete achievements or technical knowledge that matched his claimed experience. Meanwhile, Melissa had begun the systematic dismantling of their lifestyle. I drove past their house one evening and saw the garage sale signs, the carefully arranged tables of jewelry, electronics, and designer furniture, items I'd indirectly paid for through artificial bonuses and benefits now being sold to cover basic expenses. We need to be realistic about our situation, she would have told Kevin that night, surrounded by half-empty rooms and growing piles of bills. The jewelry alone should cover rent for 3 months, maybe 4 if we're careful. This is temporary, he would have insisted, his confidence cracking, but not yet broken. I'll find something appropriate soon. These companies just don't recognize quality when they see it. But the market was recognizing something else entirely, the difference between artificial success and genuine qualifications. His 4th interview was at a small startup that desperately needed marketing help and couldn't afford to be too selective. Even they passed, citing concerns about his practical experience with digital marketing tools and analytics platforms. The 5th company didn't even call him back. By the end of the week, Kevin had exhausted most of the marketing positions in Spokane that matched his salary expectations. The few remaining opportunities were either entry-level positions paying a fraction of his previous artificial income or required technical skills he'd never actually developed. Their savings, what little they had managed to accumulate beyond their lifestyle expenses, wouldn't last 2 months. The house they had been renting was too expensive for Melissa's salary alone. The car payments, insurance, utilities, and basic living expenses in the neighborhood they'd chosen to impress others, all of it had been subsidized by benefits they'd never recognized as the charity they actually were. I found myself checking real estate listings for rentals in less prestigious neighborhoods, small apartments, modest homes, the kind of places where people lived when they earned only what they actually worked for. Soon Kevin would have to make a choice, accept entry-level work that paid 1/3 of his previous income or keep waiting for opportunities that would never come. Pride versus necessity. The same calculation I'd been forced to make countless times over the years while watching them live beyond their means on my hidden generosity. The scales were finally balanced. Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the restaurant incident, my doorbell rang with a soft, hesitant chime. I opened the door to find Melissa standing on my porch. But this wasn't the confident woman who tried to manipulate me 3 days earlier. Her shoulders sagged with defeat, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her usual polished appearance replaced by the hollow look of someone who'd finally run out of options. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came to apologize. We were completely wrong about everything." I stepped aside to let her in, noting how she moved carefully, tentatively, like someone walking on thin ice after it had already cracked beneath their feet. She settled into the same chair where she'd grown up doing homework, where we'd had countless conversations about her dreams and plans. Now she sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking more like a guilty child than a grown woman. "I never understood how much you did for us all these years," she continued, tears starting fresh. "The job, the bonuses, the car, the housing help. Everything Kevin thought he'd earned was really a gift from you. And she shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. "Go on," I said gently. "We took it all for granted. Worse than that, we looked down on you for it. We thought we were successful, and you were just," she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "We were so ungrateful, so cruel." For the first time since Sunday night, I felt something other than cold satisfaction. This was my daughter, genuinely broken and remorseful, finally understanding the depth of what she'd lost. "The job interviews were disasters," she whispered. "Nobody would hire him. They could tell immediately that his experience was artificial. And our savings are gone. We'll lose the house next month. What do you want from me, Melissa? Please, she looked up at me with desperate eyes. Give Kevin one more chance. Give us both a chance to prove we understand now. We'll accept any conditions, any position, any salary, any terms you think are fair. I studied her face carefully. The arrogance was gone. The entitled expectation that problems could be solved with manipulation or family guilt had been completely stripped away by reality. This isn't about charity, Melissa. It never was. It's about respect and family values, about understanding that everything you have came from somewhere, from someone who cared enough to make your lives possible. I know that now. We both do. If I give Kevin another chance, he starts from the bottom. No special treatment, no artificial advancement. He earns every promotion, every raise, every benefit through actual performance. And if he fails again, that's it. No more opportunities. Whatever you think is fair, Dad. We trust your judgment completely. The front door opened quietly. Kevin stepped inside, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 5 days. His expensive clothes hung loose on his frame, his confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of defeat. Mr. Cox, he said formally, as if we were meeting for the first time. Melissa told me she was coming to speak with you. I wanted to add my apology to hers. Sit down, Kevin. He took the chair beside Melissa, his hands trembling slightly. I was wrong about everything, about you, about my own abilities, about what I deserved versus what I'd actually earned. I understand now that every success I thought was mine was really your generosity. And I'll accept any position you're willing to offer, any salary, any conditions. I just want the chance to prove I can actually earn my place instead of having it given to me. I looked at both of them, my daughter and her husband, humbled by reality, finally ready to rebuild their lives on honest foundations. Then we start over, I said with honesty this time. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of fresh starts and second chances. I sat behind my mahogany desk in the Cox Construction executive suite, watching Jessica Martin arrange employment contracts with the methodical precision of someone who understood that today marked more than just routine paperwork. Melissa and Kevin entered my office at exactly 9 o'clock. Their punctuality itself was a gesture of respect. They moved with the careful deference of people who had learned the difference between entitlement and opportunity. They settled into the chairs across from my desk with postures that acknowledged both my authority and their gratitude. Let's formalize the new arrangements we discussed, I began, gesturing toward the documents Jessica had prepared. These contracts reflect standard market rates and performance expectations. No artificial inflation, no special considerations beyond what any employee would receive. Kevin leaned forward, studying the papers with genuine attention. Junior Marketing Coordinator, he read aloud. Starting salary of $42,000 with advancement opportunities based on documented performance metrics. Exactly half what your previous artificial salary was, I noted. But twice what most people your age earn when they're actually starting their careers. I understand completely and accept these conditions, he said quietly. Thank you for this opportunity. Jessica explained the performance evaluation criteria, the advancement timeline, and the expectations for client interaction and project management. Every clause was standard corporate policy. The same requirements applied to any legitimate employee seeking to build a career through honest effort. For Melissa, the changes were less dramatic, but equally significant. Her HR position remained, but without the artificial bonuses and benefits she'd grown accustomed to. A market salary, standard vacation time, and health insurance earned rather than assumed. Your daughter will need to prove herself just like any other employee, I explained to them both. Nepotism ends here. Advancement comes through performance, not family connections. We wouldn't want it any other way, Melissa said firmly. We've learned the difference between given and earned success. After Jessica left with the signed contracts, I moved around my desk to sit in the chair beside them. It was a subtle shift from employer to family patriarch. In our personal relationship, respect and gratitude are non-negotiable, I said directly. No more taking my support for granted. No more assuming that family entitles you to anything beyond love and second chances. We'll never forget what you've done for us again, Dad, Melissa promised, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Or what you're doing now by letting us start over. Kevin extended his hand toward me, not as the arrogant son-in-law who'd once called me a beggar, but as a man who finally understood the value of earned respect. Thank you, Mr. Cox. I won't disappoint you this time. I shook his hand firmly. Then we moved forward together on honest terms. They left my office to begin their first day of legitimate employment, walking with the purposeful stride of people who understood that their futures depended entirely on their own efforts. Through my window, I watched them cross the parking lot toward the building entrance, no longer expecting special treatment or reserved parking spaces. The restaurant incident felt like ancient history now, though only 10 days had passed since that Sunday evening. In those 10 days, justice had run its natural course, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple consequence of letting people face the reality of their choices. I picked up my coffee and settled back into my leather chair, surveying the Cox Construction empire I'd built through decades of honest work. My phone would ring soon with business calls. My calendar would fill with legitimate meetings. My company would continue thriving under my actual leadership. And at the end of the day, I would go home to the quiet satisfaction of a man who had taught his family the most valuable lesson of all, that respect, like success, can only be truly possessed when it is genuinely earned. The scales were perfectly balanced.